Welcome Internet to Psychoanalytic Talk. And today we're going to be talking about the concept that Lacan put forward of jouissance. So before we start digging into this concept, I just want to remind you of two little things. First, even though I was trained in France, I am not a Lacanian. I had Lacanian teachers, they did give us the theory, but it's not the theory I prefer or that I am highly invested in. Like, there's bits and pieces I take, but it absolutely doesn't have my preference on the whole. That doesn't mean I don't understand it, that just means I'm not a master of it, right? Secondly, I want you to take with what I'm going to say with a pinch of salt, as I am not going to integrate aspects of Lacan's readings, like, for example, philosophical points, sociological points, and perhaps political points that have been made about him and about his writing. I'm not going to take that into account at all. I'm just really going to focus on the clinical side of things, meaning the work with the patient and the psychoanalytic theory itself, like as if it's used as a therapy, and the concept and the value of the concept in therapy. So that's what I wanted to start with, so we're all clear, and that you should take what I say with a pinch of salt, as it's not going to be as nuanced or as refined as other people talking about the subject. Very well, so let's begin. So what's very interesting with the concept of jouissance is basically it has two fundamental meanings. The first one, which most French people would directly associate with it, is the idea of sexual pleasure and orgasm. Like, that's the big one. Jouir means to orgasm. Like, most people would think that outright. So that's the first version of it, which is very interesting. And there's a second version of it, which is more law-based in the law. To jouir d'un objet is to have the object. It's to use the object and have the right to use it. So here we have a dual definition that intertwines quite well with the concept of Lacan. Because as we're going to see, there's many ramifications and there's many ways of seeing it, even within the definition that he gives himself. So for Lacan, the core root of this concept goes back to Freud. And it goes back to Freud with two main texts, Totem and Taboo and Beyond the Pleasure Principle. So in Totem and Taboo, the idea is that basically only the father of the horde, it's a Freudian myth. It's not based in science, right? But it's something that Freud postulated, that at some point in humanity there was a father figure that just had every single woman to himself. No sharing with the sons, no anything, not with anyone. He just had them. He just literally possessed them. In the French term, jouir, like that's like what he had. They were his possessions, and so fed up of the phenomenon, and the sons decided to kill him, eat him. However, attained by a form of guilt for having themselves bypassed any form of rules, they start establishing fundamental rules, mainly the prohibition of incest, the prohibition on killing, and so on and so forth, like fundamental rules. So in this Freudian myth that Lacan takes back, or at least reuses, there is a fundamental jouissance of the father towards every woman. And there is a stop to that jouissance, which is going to cut it off. And that's the core of the concept, really. It's something that's an enjoyment without any boundaries, without any limits, without anything really. And the second text, which is gonna tie very nicely, is Beyond the Pleasure Principle. Why? Because basically, in that text, Freud points out that there isn't a will, a death drive to repeat these pleasurable experiences. There is not only the pleasure principle. So, very quickly, the pleasure principle is one of Freud's most fundamental ideas, and chronologically one of the very first ideas he has is the idea that every single human is pleasure-based, that the libido seeks enjoyment, that we all seek enjoyment, pleasure, and we don't want this pleasure, we don't want bad sins, so we push them away. Basically, maximize pleasure, minimize displeasure or pain, right? Easy. But in this text, he says there's something more, something that seeks displeasure, discomfort, and destruction. And that very sin, at the core, is the death drive. So, here we have this idea that there is a death drive, and there is limitless in totem and taboo, or limitlessness in totem and taboo. And for Lacan, there's going to be a merger of both of them within the concept of jouissance. So basically, the concept of jouissance is about an unlimited pleasure. A pleasure that's so massive, unlimited, unbinded, that it breaks the pleasure principle itself. And that's one of the most fundamental aspects of the concept, is that it seeks pleasure in displeasure, pleasure in pain. It's like it's so massive that it just completely makes the pleasure principle cave in. That's the whole point of jouissance. It's, in a way, very simply put, it's enjoyment of destructivity itself. Destructivity of oneself and of others. And it's that point where there is no stop, no end to it. It's just completely and utterly boundless. And it cannot be reined in. It cannot be stopped. Because basically it's not submitted to the Oedipus complex. It goes beyond the Oedipus complex. It breaks the fundamental taboo of incest, of prevention. There is no more protection of the individuals and of others. It's just limitless. And that limitlessness, sorry, it's hard to say, is the core of jouissance. Jouissance is a fundamental destructive force within the psyche. It's something that normally brings terrible suffering, or to the person experiencing it when it's something of a masochistic behavior. And when I mean masochistic, I don't mean it in necessarily a sexual way, but also like self-defeating behaviors, self-destructing behaviors, or with others, with sadism, hatred, and enjoyment of pain and cruelty. That's basically jouissance for you. It's that core element of every single man or every single woman that goes beyond what rules can bind or prevent or forbid. It's that moment of ecstatic pleasure in horror itself. It's basically destruction at its purest form, an enjoyment of the destruction itself. And that's why I found it so interesting, because clinically it's something that's, I think, very, very common. I mean, not common in the fact that everyone's going to self-destruct, right? But like, because it's bound to the death drive, there is that sin where it's there, it's always there in the background, that one can enjoy the destruction of someone else and his own destruction. Something that we are reluctant to admit or even pursue because it seems so unnatural, so unhealthy. And yet, there's like that inkling within the back of our minds that there is such a sin as a will to go that far, both for oneself and for others. There are people, however, for whom that sensation of jouissance in the back of their minds is much more conscious, much more on the, how can I say, foreground rather than the background, right? And namely, those people are what the French would call narcissistic perverts or malignant narcissists in a more, let's say, American English vocabulary. And those people are often people that are not necessarily binded by the Oedipus complex, as it was not operating, meaning that the laws, the values, all of that just non-existent. Therefore, they were only in the pleasure principle, but the pleasure principle that has been twisted, perverted, because the fundamental core of perversion is to bend. It's even what it means in Latin. Pervertere means to bend. So, I mean, we're bending the pleasure principle into something displeasurable. And that's the core of the jouissance. And for Lacan, there is a fundamental break-off point between masculine jouissance and feminine jouissance. For him, feminine jouissance is basically having a child. Like, women are not themselves bound by the Oedipus complex, at least not in the same way. And their binding with jouissance is through the children. And very interesting enough, not when women, malignant narcissistic women, have children, they tend to see those children as an extension of themselves, as an ideal that has to shine on them, as if it was an investment that has to reap dividends, putting an intense pressure on the child and making the child an extension of themselves, unable to cut, because there's no cutting, because we're in the jouissance, meaning there's no stopping point, there's no fundamental rule of you will not hurt others and you will not hurt yourself, because that was an operating, as the Oedipus complex did not function to its fullest. And this is what it is. The jouissance is the testament in its most extreme forms of the failure of the Oedipus complex. And in its lowest forms, it's a reminiscence of a pre-Oedipal point of view. If I were to mix many theories, I would say that basically it's that schizoparanoid position that's showing through when in those moments. And there are people who basically it's just like a little, let's say, a little thread that comes through, and it's not much, but it's still part of the jouissance. And there are people who have based their whole state of being on jouissance. So both are very different, but both have that commonness in destructivity, in the enjoyment of the destruction of the self and of others, of extending their ideal and crushing it to others, or to split between their ideal and others, between idealization and devaluation. So all of that narrows it down to the fundamental core, and that's what I really got out of the concept, theoretically speaking, is that at its core, it's an enjoyment of destroying the rules of society and of morals themselves, and not in that way of creating new and better ones, but just as a simple form of exerting power, control, and possessiveness. And that's where we go back at the beginning where I said that it had two meanings, to orgasm, unlimited, right? And that idea with orgasm of unlimited pleasure, and the possessiveness, the control. And that's basically what jouissance is. It's a way of exerting control over the others, over oneself, obviously, but also over society and over civilization itself, and putting the destruction first and foremost. And that's what I got out of the concept, and that's what I think it's so fundamentally interesting as a clinician to have that concept, because it helps us think of the darkest points of humanity. And that's why I like it, because it forces us to confront something that's displeasurable but essential in order for us to understand all the nuances of mankind. That being said, I am not a Lacanian, as I've stated earlier, so my understanding might be slightly off-ish. I hope it's not too off, but if it's off, feel free to correct me in the comments. And I hope you like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.